WEFUNK. We funk.
But I guess that you really can't talk about Biggie, though, without having the age-old Biggie-Tupac conversation and all.
And I feel like you're going to kind of go on a rant of Tupac's not even in the running. I feel like you kind of made it clear that you're more of
well,
a
I mean, I guess
Nas,
I'll give you my
Biggie.
feeling, but as well I would, I guess, another part of the conversation that has to take place is a little bit of regional thing. Like we always talk about, Devin grew up in Florida. I grew up in the suburbs of Jersey, right outside New York. So for me, I grew up right outside New York City, kind of in the golden age of that whole movement with Nas and Wu-Tang and Biggie and all that kind of stuff. So I've got just that, like, you know, and again, with Hot 97, my local radio station playing them, all that kind of stuff. Like
97.
Yeah, like I was just, you know, I had just, you know, there's a devotion and, you know, a bias to East Coast rap that I'm going to have in the Biggie vs. Tupac. But
You were getting those old 50 Cent underground tapes, huh?
Oh, fuck yeah, that was a couple years later, but but I remember like how big it was in like I remember waiting online at Tower Record for Life After Death, and I remember on Hot 97 what a big deal it was when, you know, Biggie would be on Freestyle with Angie Martinez and just like all that kind of stuff. Like it was just a huge deal in the city, culture-wise, going on, you know.
Sure.
As a white kid from the suburbs, 20 miles outside of the city, that's how much it was affecting, you know, it was huge out in the suburbs as well, obviously. But so in terms of so I do say Biggie's the GOAT. I go Nas number 2. But in terms of do I like Tupac, I do really like Tupac. I'd say he's definitely like top 10, you know, top 5-ish, maybe top 7. I'd say somewhere in that meaty part of the curve. So I think he's really, you know, really good. However, like we talked about before, but I kind of go the quality versus quantity argument with Tupac, where Tupac has a very big catalog of material. However, not all of it is great, whereas Biggie has a smaller catalog of material, but all of it was. So that's kind of where I go.
Well, let's be, I mean, to me, to some aspect too, dude, I would say that helps a lot with me on the Tupac side of it. And only just because. And
so now do you go Tupac better than
Biggie and Tupac, I mean, I'd put him up there if not.
Okay.
Because
like
Tupac was like
neck.
a poet, dude. You know what I mean? Like his music, and there was something I listened to, which I'll talk about in a bit, but his music really changed. There was a time where his rap was more like, you wouldn't call Tupac a gangster rapper. And then like he got fucking shot and like became bitter and got entangled with Suge Knight. Where if you listen to his albums, they changed dramatically from like honoring like women to like turning into like murder and fucking like rape albums and shit, dude. And it's fucking. But to me, I guess the other point I was making though is we're both the same age. So when Biggie and Tupac died, dude, we were like 14, 15, right? And then. So when Biggie died, you know, Life After Death came out. And then other than that, there was pretty much just like maybe a Funkmaster Flex song that you would find later with Biggie on it or Ready to Die. But as a kid, just finding out like, oh, there's like fucking 9 Tupac albums and they're still coming out. Like, dude, there's so much fucking content.
And like you said, the thing with Tupac was they kept
listen to this one
because
it's strictly for his friends. But all the other albums, like.
But no, you're right, and there was so much stuff kept on coming out, and you could definitely back catalog a lot more after he died and all.
And this is to me too.
And you're right, he definitely changed his style a big time, and that's kind of, I almost feel like he kind of was just jumping on the gangster rap wave, where it's just like the guys in NWA were from criminal activity, lifestyles in Compton and whatnot, and brought that to their music. I feel like Tupac was kind of like, hey, that's a cool thing to rap about, and jumped into that game as like a cunning, he was more like a pop star kind of Kanye mind, where he was doing things for an intended purpose of pushing buttons, rapping like this. He was like intentionally cunning, you know, business-minded with all of that kind of shit, where I feel like other rappers were just fucking raw in what they were.
Well, before I give my 2 cents on that, too, because I will plug another podcast, which I never do on this show, but unless it's a big LW production, but he's packing the bowl. Done with the joint, he's packing the bowl, man. He's the celebrate Notorious DAY over here.
There we go.
But I will say that what was I talking about? I would just say rap-wise, though, because we're talking about, like, the GOATs out there. And I'm not saying they are the GOAT, but another thing that we've talked about that you didn't really get so much up there, but, like, the fucking Outkast albums, the Dungeon Family albums, like that fucking Southern rap, that No Limit, even though like that was more New Orleans, it was still that Southern kind of fucking rap. The Trick Daddy was a fucking huge
Especially Outkast, I think, put out their first album before Ready to Die came out. Like Outkast was
Outkast was out there a long time.
Yeah, for
dude.
sure.
So, those old albums before Andre 3000 is like dressed like a cartoon character, dude. Like, when it was just like hard fucking ATL rap, dude. That shit was fucking
for sure. So if you're like from Atlanta in 1990 or 1992, you're sitting around like, fuck, hey man, there was other rap music going on here as well. Like there's
a big scene, huge scene down there, dude.
Yeah.
And then Southern rap adventure just at some point kind of became almost like more too upbeat and too goofy. Like Outkast kind of held that same. If you listen to those old original Outkast albums, like you said, and I'll even throw out, dude, those first two DMX albums, because again, it's in our same like age range.
Yeah.
Dude, those fucking first couple of DMX albums were fucking hot as
for
fuck,
sure.
Dude.
And DMX was like, I don't even know where he was from, but he's like his, had just
Detroit.
a unique.
I think he's Detroit, right?
I mean, I don't even know, dude. He like didn't really rep a city. He was just so unique to himself.
He could also be hell. He could also
different.
come from hell, which my mom predicted.
Yeah, I think it was the name of the album, right? That's what he was from Parts Unknown when fucking
yeah. But those albums,
I can honestly see if I grew up in Florida or if I grew up anywhere outside of New York, thinking maybe, having a different opinion and thinking that Tupac was better, or just thinking a lot more highly of Tupac, but literally being, and again, like you said, the perfect age where I was probably like too young. I was definitely too young to like Tupac before, like Biggie died in 97. We were 13 or 14 years old. Mm-hmm. So by that point, I was like, 12, 11 in the middle of the East Coast, West Coast thing. So that's going to just like bias my opinion forever on Tupac. So if I had fresh eyes, I would I would probably have a different
That's a great
take.
point.
But
I mean,
it's really hilarious, dude. If you knew the fucking great suburban town that me and all my friends grew up in, like how dedicated, because that was the popular music in like the junior high school. Biggie, that's what was big. Grunge was good.
Grunge was.
Yeah. So it's
but
just
it was
like,
it was Biggie and Tupac though. It would be like more of a discussion. It was like, who do you like better? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
No, this is like Yankees, Red Sox.
I was like, who do you like better? And I was like, it was finally I was the right age where I could be like, can we throw Eminem in the discussion already? He's pretty good.
I mean, we'll do a closer look at favorite hip hop stars, but
dude, just kind of talk about too, like what we're talking about. And I'll just quickly plug because it's nothing we've done, but there's a great fucking podcast documentary. And it gets more into like we're talking about how this documentary on Netflix was more of like just kind of how he came up and kind of more of the fun stuff, quote unquote. This podcast kind of gets into the nitty gritty of it, dude. And it's this podcast called Slow Burn. You have to listen to the third season. I might have talked about this show before.
Yeah, no, this is it's one of those anthology or whatever it is. I forget what's the kind of series.
Exactly, an anthology.
So like every season's a different thing. So the first two seasons were fucking actual historic things going on, and then the third season was randomly Biggie.
Essentially, I was thinking about this while I was writing it. They're essentially Slate is kind of like a political podcast platform because the first season is all about Nixon and Watergate, which I thought was interesting because of just I wasn't around back then. And it's just crazy like how deep the government corruption goes. The second season is all about the Lewinsky-Clinton scandal, which was just a fun thing to listen to because of, again, kind of realizing like how the government worked and like how big of a deal that was. From our age, I just remembered from all like the blowjob jokes.
For sure,
you know what I mean?
For me and you, we were like 10, 11. That was just like, Conan
O'Brien. I would call that to a girl, be like, "What are you, a Monica Lewinsky?" Yeah,
yeah, no, for sure.
The fourth season is all about like David Duke and like how that Ku Klux Klan member like ran for politics and whatnot. And then the third season is just called Biggie and Tupac, and it really just kind of shows where they both are like at certain points in their life, like at the same time concurrently, and how they both kind of came up at the same time, like their friendship, but more of like the fucking criminal sides of it. But the way it kind of fits into the fucking political side of it, dude, is like a lot of stuff happened with just this one guy like ended up killing a cop, and they found Tupac albums in his car, and they're like, oh, it kind of brought up that political like is gangster rap music to blame for like these fucking kids being violent. Is it like, are they a creature from violence, or is violence a creature from their music? and like it kind of was like a big thing with like parental warnings on albums and whatnot.
Yeah,
there was a big discussion, and like court cases went into like a couple of things from that. So it did have these two guys, these fucking two 20-year-old kids, did kind of have like a big, not a political movement, but like things and laws were like moved around because of like them. And,
well, I mean,
it's a really interesting, but it also deep dives like who killed them. And it's really interesting. If you're a fan of like this documentary and all, like we are, and like how big of a thing that the Biggie Tupac thing was, I definitely recommend checking out the third season of Slow Burn. It's hosted by Joel Anderson, who was an ESPN and BuzzFeed sports culture and political writer, but he fucking like fits right in with the crew. He talks to it's really good, dude. Really.
I mean, just in terms of like the censorship and all, you know, just from that aspect of, you know, we were talking about the celebratory nature of his funeral, and I was talking about the content of the album. But I mean, in all honesty, dude, like it's a totally crazy, antisocial, fucking horrible, violent, like the content of the album is not something to be celebrated by children, and I love it. I think it's the greatest album of all time, Ready to Die. But obviously, to have like fucking to have like little kids in the streets growing up with this album as, you know, glorified and romanticized, that's definitely not good for society. I'm not saying that the album should be fucking banned, or I'm not, you know, but there, you'd hope that there'd be parental responsibility, and like, you'd hope that 6-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids, you know, even though like me in the suburbs that didn't have access to doing any of this kind of stuff, it made me feel like a little badass. And if I was growing up in the Bronx or Brooklyn where I had access to actually being a little badass, I'm sure that it fucking did influence, you know, how could it not influence people negatively? Now, is that the fault or the responsibility of the artist or the fucking, you know, greater culture?
Dude, absolutely. I'm with you,
there's
man.
no way that it's a positive album, and there's no way that fucking, that's what I was saying.
For sure.
It's not made for mainstream consumption, you know what I mean? Like, it's not what should be the #1 album in the country. It's fucking crazy antisocial.
Now, if Biggie was still alive today, would his albums be a little different now, or would he be canceled entirely? Who's to say? But I'm with you, dude. I would listen to like the old Biggie albums and Tupac albums as like being like that 14, 15-year-old kid and feeling like a little badass, and then someone would be like, "Oh, you ever seen American History X?" And it's like, "Well, now I don't know what to think."
Seriously. But that fireman rant, I fucking. No, great call. But I mean, in all honesty, dude, as a little kid, as a little douchey white kid from the suburbs listening to that album, if I was in Brooklyn, I would have been fucking meaning business, you know what I mean? Or at least the fucking, you know, tough friends of mine.
Well, I talk about it, and I've talked about it multiple times on this show too, but my mom taking away that second DMX album from me, where he's on the album like covered in blood. And I was like, "Mom, it's not as bad as you think." She's like, "Then play it for me." I was like, "Yeah, go ahead, take it
away." Not winning that battle, huh?
No, I'd rather you think whatever you think it is. I don't want you to know what I'm listening to.
Yeah.
Big F! WEFUNK. We funk.